guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm back here at home today. I'm getting the RC cars back oriented and ready to go for the next round of racing. I figured I'd show you guys a little bit of what I got going on with the B6.4D car that I bought a while back. Of course, that you guys saw the unboxing video. I can at least show you a little bit of what I got going on with the car now that everything's together. And I've got a little bit of driving experience with it and share a little bit with you of what I've got going on as far as setup and a little bit of the things that I've changed on the vehicle to make it a little bit more tuned for the local track and for my style of driving. All in all, the car went together really well. I mean, the Team Associated instructions are pretty straightforward, the way that they're laid out. All the bags inside the box that everything comes in, of course, is labeled, so you know step by step how everything goes together. And as I've always mentioned in other videos before, it's good to have a decent set of tools to be able to put things together, and it just kind of helps along with the process of getting things assembled and make things a little bit easier for you. So essentially with the vehicle, everything is almost kit stock. I have made a few different changes to it from what the kit has and from what I've actually put to the vehicle. One of the biggest things that, of course, is with this vehicle compared to the B5M that I have sitting here as well is, of course, how the chassis is laid out and the way the transmission is set up. Now, the B5M has a little bit more of a stand-up style transmission, and essentially it came from a platform where the rear motor buggies had the transmission turned around and essentially put the motor to where it was more to the inside of the chassis, and of course the weight was a little bit more forward, but it was still kind of up high, whereas with the B6.4D model that I have, it's got a lay-down style transmission, which of course helps with the center of gravity, helps with the chassis handling, and then of course the motor is to the inside of the chassis versus the outside, and then everything is shifted, of course, oriented in a way based on how the chassis design is. There's actually a little bit more room in the front of the chassis with the latest model that I've got here versus the B5M, to where I've got more room for the speed controller, the servo, the receiver, that sort of thing. So it made it so I could kind of maneuver things around a little bit, get things planted where I wanted to. Now, of course, with the chassis itself being pretty much kit stock, the changes that I've made came to the front shocks themselves. I changed out the springs to a little bit of a stiffer spring. I believe the kit comes with the associated white springs, and I put the associated gray springs on the front. Then, of course, oriented the shocks to a little bit of a different angle in the front and on the rear, just to kind of get it set up a little bit better for my own track here at home. And then, of course, the oil in the front, the kit comes with 30 weight oil. I changed it to 32.5. I kept the rear oil at 30. This is exactly as how it comes with the kit. So there's not too much of a change there, but just for my local track, that seemed to be a better way to go. Now, I've also changed out the screw kit that came with the car. RC Speed Secrets has a titanium screw kit that I decided to put to the car, and I also decided to change out the turnbuckles to a 3.5 millimeter diameter buckle from the 3 millimeter buckle that comes with the kit. Now, those are made out of a titanium material as well, so they're a little bit less weight, and they're bigger, so they're a little bit stronger. Helps take weight off the car. I actually did pull off 58 grams of weight from the car. I actually have a small food scale. I was able to weigh the total weight of the screws and the turnbuckles that I took off with the plastic rod ends on them. But of course, some of that weight went back into the vehicle when I put the titanium components back on it. So I actually don't have a final weight on the car yet, but it did take a little bit of weight off the car. It doesn't exactly make it that much more faster. It does help a little bit with your acceleration and your top speed, and it also helps with a little bit of a better handling vehicle because the suspension doesn't have to move that much weight to be able to get around corners and be able to handle the bumps. So it's something that helps. It's not necessarily something that you necessarily have to invest into. Really learning setup and driving the car and just practicing at your track is really the best way to get faster. And of course, I should probably take my own advice because I haven't been driving very well lately in the little race series that we have here, but I'm trying to figure that out and get some of the dumb mistakes out of my head and at least get it to where I'm driving a little bit better. And one of the other components that I've actually changed on the car is on the rear end here, which I don't know if you can see it in the camera there, but the ball stud mount on the rear, I actually put on the factory team mount, which is a +2 mount. Now what that means is that it takes the rear ball studs and moves them up 2 millimeters high without putting the spacers underneath them that you could with the factory rear ball stud mount. What that does is give you a little bit more of a solid mount to the rear ball studs, and it reduces any kind of flex that might be back there. But there's a disadvantage to it as well. It means that you're automatically 2 millimeters up on the rear ball studs from what the factory setup has. And so I don't know if that's necessarily a component that is a good thing to have or a bad thing to have, because you can't really adjust them any lower from what it's set with this rear mount versus the factory mount. So something to keep in mind as you're changing your anti-roll in the back. Now the anti-squat and the toe on the rear has been kept the same. I do run a little bit of camber in the car. I've got probably 3 degrees in the rear and maybe 1.5 to 2 degrees in the front right now because we're running a little bit of a tighter layout at my local track. So I put a little bit more negative camber into the setup. And then of course the toe on the front is about as even as I can get it. I try and keep the toe on the center of the car about 0 and not really have too much toe in or toe out. That way the car tracks relatively straight. So that's pretty much the changes that I've made to the vehicle. I actually have the other camera here, so I'm going to kind of give you guys a little bit of a close-up, hopefully, as far as what the cars have and a little bit of the differences between the two. So as you can see on the front orientation of the shocks, of course, the angle that they're sitting at, and of course you can see the new tie rods that are on here as well that I got from RC Speed Secrets, and you can see some of the titanium colored hardware that's in there, just to kind of give you an idea as to how it's laid out. For those of you that are familiar with RC cars, you can see how I have things laid out in the front. You have to excuse my bad wiring, but I just did that to kind of move things out of the way so you can see the way things are set up. And then of course as we move to the rear here, you can see the way the motor is, how it's a little bit lower actually in this chassis compared to the B5M chassis. And then the transmission as well. As I mentioned before, it's the laydown style transmission. The B5M, which I'll show you in a moment, this component here with the top shaft and where your spur gear is actually sits higher in the car. In this car, it sits a lot lower, so it of course reduces your center of gravity and helps with the handling of the vehicle. So moving over to the B5M here, which I'll show you, you can see a little bit of what's going on here with the front suspension on it. Just a little bit of a difference with where the ball studs are at, the angles that they're sitting at. And then, of course, you can see how open the chassis is because, of course, all the electronics that I had in the B5M, I moved over to the B6.4. Now, the battery, of course, with this, the battery tray that's here, associated with their first platform, kind of give you these foam blocks to be able to adjust where you wanted the battery and how you wanted the weight to orient within the chassis, because that is one of the heaviest components in the car compared to the motor. So you could adjust that a little bit for track conditions and try to give you a little bit more, traction by moving the battery back or moving it forward. And then, of course, as you move to the back here, you can see like what I'm talking about with the B5M, how the spur gear sits a lot higher on this car than it does in the B6.4. And I'll kind of move the camera around a little bit so you can kind of see on the transmission the way it's set up. And of course the motor went in here and then the transmission sits up top. Now this essentially, if you turned it around, that would give you ideally what would be like the B5 standard chassis where you had the motor to the back versus the front. So that's one of the biggest difference with what Associated found out with this platform. And then of course over the years they've gone up to what you now have with the B6.4. And what, the layout here of that is, we'll take a closer look here as you get in, zoom in on a little bit of the motor there and how I have things set up a little bit, and a little bit about what's going on with the car. So all in all, it's been a really good little chassis to work with. Driving it, of course, has been, of my own accord, trying to figure the thing out a little bit and not, catch a pipe while I'm on the track or try and jump the car properly and make sure it clears jumps the right way. And a little bit of nervousness in my driving. I don't know why lately, but, that's just been it. It's got nothing to do with the car itself. The car is actually a really good platform. If you're considering one of these compared to some of the other companies, I really like it. I've used Associated vehicles off and on for a number of years. In fact, my first vehicle I ever started out with was a Team Associated RC12LW, which was an on-road 12 scale little GTP style car, road race type car. A lot of fun, learned a lot with that, and of course I've carried it over the years into what you see here. So that's pretty much it for both cars, and of course for this one at least, and what I got going on with it. I'm going to make a few more changes with the car. I'm probably going to update a couple of things. There is an aluminum steering rack assembly that I might update too, just to give it a little bit more of a better feel in the front. And then of course shock and spring changes will come, and oil weight changes will come to the shocks as the track layout changes. That's just standard with most RC cars as you start to race and as you start to learn track conditions and get a little bit better with things. It's got the kit bearings in it. I haven't changed over to a ceramic bearing yet. The kit bearings have been fine. I just keep them well cleaned up between each race and keep them lubed up. In fact, I still have the stock rear axles on it and the stock rear hubs. So all that is pretty much the factory from what you get in the kit setup versus maybe going out and buying aftermarket parts. So, I mean, aftermarket parts are great to have, but ultimately the best thing to do is go out there, learn your track, learn the setup, and just practice, practice, practice. Aftermarket lightweight parts always look good and they're cool to have, but it doesn't really, do much for you if you're not practicing with the vehicle. So just something to keep in mind. So for now, this is Brad, the Lucky 7 Racing. I'm glad you guys joined me on the video. If you like these, of course, like, share, and subscribe at the bottom. I know I never say that in very many of my videos. If you notice, I never have any advertisements in my videos. I really just do these for fun. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. You guys take it easy.